Jung's most dangerous discovery wasn't about the unconscious mind. It was about people who feel everything others hide and why this sensitivity slowly poisons them from within. In his clinical practice, Jung documented patients with what he called an extraordinary energetic signature. Individuals who could walk into any room and immediately absorb the emotional weight of everyone present, who felt grief that wasn't theirs, who sensed betrayal in their bones before words ever confirmed it. They weren't mentally ill, they weren't imagining things. They possessed what Jung would later describe as a rare aura, a psychological field so finely tuned it became indistinguishable from a death sentence. Jung called this discovery dangerous because these individuals consistently ended up exhausted, exploited, and unable to protect themselves from the emotional weight of everyone around them. Not because they were weak, but because feeling everything came with a price no one warned them about. Today, I'll show you Jung's most profound observations about people who possess this rare aura, and why both he and Alan Watts believed this sensitivity either consumes you completely or transforms you into the rarest form of human consciousness. The case that revealed Jung's deepest insights about the empathic aura began with a patient who arrived at his Zurich practice in 1921, 3 years after he published his groundbreaking work on psychological types. This patient, a woman in her early 30s, came to Jung not because she felt too little, but because she felt too much. She described walking through crowds and absorbing strangers' despair. She spoke of knowing when friends were lying before they opened their mouths. She confessed that she could sense deaths in her family days before they occurred. Jung wrote in his private correspondence, "The patient presents a phenomenon I have rarely encountered with such intensity. She appears to possess no psychological membrane separating her inner world from the emotional reality of others. She couldn't maintain employment because her colleagues' suppressed frustrations would manifest as physical pain in her own body. She couldn't sustain romantic relationships because she absorbed her partner's unprocessed grief and carried it as her own. She couldn't even visit her childhood home without being flooded by decades of accumulated emotional residue trapped in those walls." Jung realized he wasn't treating a disorder. He was observing what happens when the boundary between self and other dissolves, when the soul becomes too porous for ordinary existence. But Jung discovered something even more disturbing about where this sensitivity originated. Because it wasn't a gift bestowed at random. It was forged in fire. Jung developed a concept he called the wounded healer, the archetype of those who gain the power to heal others precisely because they themselves were broken first. And he observed that the rare aura of the true empath almost always emerged from this same crucible. The aura wasn't born from kindness. It wasn't a spiritual reward for good behavior. It was an adaptation, a survival mechanism developed in childhood when reading the emotional atmosphere became a matter of psychological life and death. Jung wrote, "The child who must anticipate a parent's rage before it erupts learns to read what cannot be spoken. The child who must navigate unpredictable emotional terrain develops antennae invisible to those raised in stability." This explains why so many empaths report difficult childhoods. Not because suffering creates virtue, but because suffering creates vigilance. The nervous system, forced to detect danger through emotional frequencies, becomes permanently calibrated to receive signals that others cannot perceive. The aura is the scar tissue of early wounds transformed into a sixth sense. Modern neuroscience has begun to validate what Jung intuited a century ago. Dr. Elaine Aron's research on highly sensitive persons reveals that roughly 20% of the population possesses a nervous system that processes sensory and emotional information more deeply than average. Their mirror neurons fire more intensely. Their limbic systems respond more dramatically to emotional stimuli. But Jung identified something more specific within this sensitive population. A subset of individuals whose sensitivity transcended mere reactivity and became something closer to reception, a living antenna tuned to frequencies most humans have learned to ignore. Jung observed, "These individuals do not merely react to emotion, they receive it. Their entire organism becomes an instrument for detecting the unspoken, the repressed, the hidden. This is both their gift and their gravest danger." Alan Watts, the philosopher who bridged Eastern wisdom and Western psychology, offered a radical reframing of this phenomenon that illuminates why the empath's experience feels so overwhelming. Watts taught that the conventional sense of self, the feeling of being a separate entity contained within the skin, is fundamentally an illusion. We are not isolated beings moving through an external world. We are processes of that world. waves of a single ocean convinced we are independent drops of water. Watts wrote, "You do not come into this world. You come out of it as a wave comes out of the ocean. You are not a stranger here." For most people, this interconnection remains theoretical. They intellectually understand they are part of a larger whole, but they experience themselves as separate. The boundary of the skin feels absolute, but for the true empath, that boundary is thinner. The illusion of separation is less convincing. They feel the ocean in ways that others merely think about. Watts would say the empath doesn't feel too much. The empath simply feels what is actually there, the continuous flow of energy and emotion that connects all living things. Everyone else has learned to filter it out. The empath never developed that filter. This reframing transforms the experience entirely. The empath isn't broken. They are simply more immersed in the truth of existence. Their sensitivity is not a malfunction, but an intimate